We call this meeting of the JMRL Board Policy Committee to order. And the first agenda item, we don't have any remote participants.
No remote participation.
And so we'll begin with policy 4.41 bookmobile. So last meeting we had discussed, we'd gone through the whole existing policy and discussed a kind of distilled a set of bullet points that we wanted to have a new draft or a new version. And a lot of it we also had said could be kind of moved to operational or procedural language, the stuff that was very day-to-day oriented. So a intrepid team of policy drafters put together this draft based on the bullet points that we came up with. You do, if you have the full board agenda, there is a copy of the draft in that handout. It's easier for you to follow along with that and look on the screen. But maybe, David, we could briefly try and summarize back the bullet points, and then we can kind of go through one by one. We can go through the new draft and see how those have been implemented or incorporated. Give it over, David.
Yeah, that's fine. So quite a few comments throughout the document that we had been working on this committee for the last 2 meetings. And here are the things that we want to make sure the world knows about this policy. So there's, what does the board want the staff to do? What does the public need to know about this service? There was a discussion about, do we keep kind of institutional versus neighborhood service in this document? Wanted to make sure that the public was clear that whenever you see the bookmobile, it's available for anyone to use, even if it's stopped outside of an institution of some sort. We wanted to tell the public what they needed to know about how to request a modification to routes or added stops. We wanted to make sure the public knew how to request visits, which Marion has been calling community outreach events. We wanted to make sure the public knows that the bookmobile has its own collection, and it may be in the stacks. I think we'll get into this later, but there's a collection that belongs to the bookmobile. So when you look online, it says bookmobile. That might be on the bus, but it also might be at Marion's home office there. So there's some discussion about how to communicate that. We want to make sure the office hours were on the webpage, which was done. I wanted to link to the webpage for more information about services, office hours. And we wanted to at least acknowledge the existence of other outreach vehicles, specifically the Violet, which is the name of the Nelson outreach vehicle. And then some of the discussions that we had kind of throughout is this bookmobile and outreach services, or is it mobile library services, or is it all 3 of those things? And I think we kind of decided that this is not all of outreach services. We're talking specifically about bookmobile delivered service, but the question of whether or not we would change the name to mobile library service, I think, is still open to the committee. And then kind of, I remember Martha wanted to explain, well, what is a bookmobile? How does it work? We wanted to maybe get a little bit into the unique funding structure of the bookmobile, because it is not available for patrons in all 5 jurisdictions of JMRL. And then we had some discussion about things that were procedural and where to keep them and not. I remember writing create a form for creating a form, and then a bit of wordsmithing that was there.
Okay, so that's all by way of context.
And we wanted to say what was not in the book.
Yes, and that's
We
in the
wanted
draft.
to lay out like what services you wouldn't be able to get.
So you'll see that in the draft. Okay, so just going from the top, as David referenced, there was a kind of a discussion of the phrase mobile library services as sort of a more expansive concept of when we're in some way bringing the physical library services to a remote location. But we also think bookmobile is, so first of all, bookmobile is the main vehicle that we use to provide that, and also it's sort of a familiar name. So what we proposed is the draft title the policy title would now be mobile library services parentheses bookmobile, which is having your cake and eating it, but open to thoughts on that approach.
I think it's good to have bookmobile in there because that's a recognizable thing that people know what it is. Mobile library services, you could think, oh, is it online? Is it like your mobile phone?
That's a good point. Could just leave it bookmobile too, because there's a small part of me that's concerned that we need to go back through and find every place that this is referenced.
And change it.
Change the title. Or at least one, but it might be more. I mean, that shouldn't be a reason not to do it, but,
I played with a translator, looking through the primary languages, like in Charlottesville, Albemarle, and some of the translations are so super far from what we actually do. It was funny.
because of the bookmobile or because of the mobile library site?
No, bookmobile. I looked for bookmobile, and one of them translates into mobile phone, another one translated into like a mobile paper, like just paper. Yeah. The ones that are the closest are German, Italian, and French, because they also have bookmobile services in these places. But when I looked for like Farsi and Dari, and I looked at like Ethiopian languages,
There's no equivalent.
no, it's a very literal translation that doesn't even come close to library in some cases. There just isn't one. And that was like my concern about the name of it.
And so
in my
you're,
vehicle.
you're speaking to just the translation of the word bookmobile or okay, not that you ran through the whole policy through.
No, just the word itself.
Okay. But then did you also try mobile library services?
I tried mobile library,
Yeah.
not services, and mobile library, even a literal translation.
Yeah.
Still translates, like still includes like the word library, and
Right.
languages do have a reasonable equivalent to library.
Okay, so from that
That's what I
standpoint,
based
you're
on,
you're
yeah.
recommending basically the whole.
So that's an argument for having both.
But the vehicle itself is quote unquote named bookmobile,
Right.
so there's validity to also still include
Yeah.
that word at least in the title.
Any objections to mobile library services bookmobile? Okay, I think
Okay,
change it.
so in first paragraph is sort of an introduction. What are mobile library services and what is the bookmobile? A little bit of history and a little bit of purpose in the last sentence. Why are we doing this? And it's tied into the mission.
Okay, so Marion had a couple thoughts here. First sentence, Jefferson Madison Regional Library provides mobile library services primarily through its bookmobile. Mobile library branch brings services directly to patrons. You like neighborhoods instead of patrons?
Yeah, it comes up very often that they think the patrons think or request home delivery service. I don't know if it's worth, clarifying that right there in the policy. It's not an undue hardship to just let them know when they ask that, I'm sorry, that's not what we do.
That makes sense. On the other hand, when you're saying neighborhoods, some of the stops are not necessarily neighborhood stops. They're, they might be sitting at an institution. It's for the neighborhood, but we would call it the name of the institution, right?
Yeah, but it's for like that area at large.
Yes, of course. I think I prefer patrons, but I hear your reasoning there.
Would some people interpret neighborhood meaning that if I'm not a member of that neighborhood, I can't come to the bookmobile?
There's that possibility as well. It's been tricky to communicate that it is open to the public regardless of the area.
That is one of the things that this committee identified as wanting to try to come through in this policy to make sure people know that no matter where it stopped, you're welcome.
Yeah, no, this suggestions are just kind of like trying to play with language to try to convey a broad scope of service. But it's still not ideal, but it's like I said, it's just playing with language to see we can all come up with.
All right, any strong thoughts on patrons or neighborhoods?
Directly to library users.
The long-standing debate about what we call the people we serve in libraries.
Exactly, right. In libraries, it's been patrons forever, and there's some schools of thought that that's not, people don't know what that means. So library users would be a better, because libraries for a long time didn't want to say customers, because they wanted to differentiate from for-profit services.
What about, and that still has the connotation that it could be an individual, and Marion's wanting to get away from that possibility. What about communities throughout the region?
Sure. Communities, Marion?
Yeah, that was actually my next suggestion in the
Yes.
next sentence, just communities.
Okay, this is where I'm always gonna mess this up, because we need to prep this for the board to see what's changed since they saw it.
Although communities then
Yeah,
is in the
that
next
doesn't
sentence,
sound
now that we
right.
notice this.
That could be individuals in neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Let's see, directly to communities. Yeah,
I would turn all that into patrons, honestly, just because.
How about just those? Operating continuously since 1946, the Bookmobile has its own browsable collection and serves those with limited access to physical library branches.
yeah.
For redlining purposes, it used to say individuals and communities.
I think Marion added the and communities.
I'm looking at the printout for the handout for the board one. Yeah.
Was the first one right, Mike?
This is,
The first change we made?
yes.
Thank you. Communities. Okay, and this, I think, was speaking to some of what Martha was asking about in our last meeting, you know, why, what is it and why? Mobile library service. Extend JMRL's mission by reaching patrons who face barriers to in-person visits due to geographical location, physical limitations, transportation challenge, or other accessibility constraints.
Okay, then we have a bullet point of what the Bookmobile does and does not provide.
Fully functioning mobile library branch, following features and services, browsable collection housed on the vehicle. So this is where, you know, we can have a discussion about whether or not it's important to include with additional items stored in the closed stacks of the Bookmobile office. Like, does that have meaning to the patron? Do they know what closed stacks are? I do want to get across this concept that because
Not everything's on the,
if the catalog says it's available at the Bookmobile, it's not,
don't assume it's on the bus.
it might
Yeah.
not physically be on the bus that comes by.
I think it's good.
If you don't want to say closed stacks, you could just say with additional items in storage at the bookmobile offices. Because that's kind of like, you know, the Ivy stacks, like you have to request these items
Yeah.
to
In,
come.
in
Closed
storage,
stacks is, yeah, that's a technical term.
Yes.
I like that. Storage sounds like it's closed anyways. I mean, it's.
Although they're not really, and it's not like they're boxed up. To
No.
me, this gives the impression of like a warehouse, you know, like the
Say house.
Housed or
house.
shelved,
Good.
housed or shelved in the office, yeah.
Yeah.
So it makes you realize there's another set of shelves and those things aren't on the bus.
Like that housed in the Bookmobile offices.
Yeah, that works.
I'll let you know if people start knocking on the door after you read this.
Visit the house.
After they've gone in detail through the bookmobile
Yeah.
services policy.
That part is usually not a huge issue, but it's in summer. We get new patrons chasing us down and popping up.
Yeah, confused about the rules. Okay, we made a distinction here because it is a different checkout cycle than most of the rest of JMRL because of the schedule of the bookmobile items go out. Because Marion's not gonna see you again.
You say
sometime.
loan,
Loan,
loan, LOAN, loan,
loaning of library materials.
loan, with a 4-week loan period instead of checkout.
They meant for borrowing. Okay,
I mean, that's just personal preference, but checkout seems like a cash.
Like at the cash register.
Loan,
Yeah.
you're bringing it back. In theory, you're bringing it back.
ability to request and pick up holds from any JMRL location. So my only question there is, do the people reading this know what holds are? Should that be materials instead?
Materials requested.
I'd like holds because that's how, on the website, if want something that came from a different branch, it's called a hold there.
On hold shelf.
Yeah, and yeah, if it's materials, that doesn't convey to me sort of the process by which I get a hold of that material.
And again, I think you hit the nail on the head, Mary, which is that people might see this and then they're gonna come and use the service and be able to talk to you about this too.
Yeah.
Ability to accept the return of borrowed materials. Readers advisory services. Maybe let's pause on that one maybe. So this is something that you can provide. Oh, your staff are specialist level staff too, so they get training and providing readers advisory. Library card registration and renewal. Free public Wi-Fi access, currently working. Always have to ask.
I mean, depends where you're
Where you are.
parking, but it's the majority of our stops, we are the internet.
Far into the hills you get.
I'll also say at this policy level, we're intending that this is going to be the service. So even if it didn't work today, that would mean pay staff to make it work.
Well, there are some places that the bookmobile travels to
Yeah,
that just
I see.
do not have
Yeah.
access to any of the services that would provide mobile Wi-Fi until we get,
Where available, you could say,
I think
I think it's fine as is. Could add that where available.
I don't know, it doesn't, do you have people that just pull up to use the Wi-Fi like they do outside the buildings?
I do not know.
Yeah,
It's
you
not
can-
obvious.
Yeah.
And you don't need to sign in like how you would do it
So you can't
central
tell how
or-
many sign-ins you get.
No, that we'd have to
Taylor can.
put in a request for that, yeah, to have that monitored.
How long are you generally at one location?
The majority of our stops are 1 hour. Mhm.
Access to information about other JMRL services and programs. Anything we're leaving off here that happens on a regular basis? That people should expect.
We generally offer passive programming, which is like take and makes, but I don't know if there's a need to like really highlight that point.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything here that prevents that from happening or says it has to be happening. So I'm okay with it.
And we do provide some reference.
Yeah.
Is not our primary service or the primary request. How to access, whatnot, community services. We do have that sheet of community services that we can make. We might have, it's mostly a lot of circulation and placing holds. And reference wise, helping them place holds on like study materials.
Library resources, yeah. Instead of a traditional ready reference of like, who's the president of. I think that's good then. So, and to your point here, the following services that are generally not available,
Mhm.
printing or copying, public computer access, notaries, meeting room facilities.
Correct.
Anything else that people ask for sometimes that you have to say, no, that's not, we don't, you'd have to go to a branch for that?
Bathroom, right.
No.
Story time?
Sometimes we don't have that request for story time, not on board. Sometimes we have some of our stops that,
We have done that at the market, that when you
yeah, but
had,
that's special events. That's like community outreach, and that's something we usually coordinate with other branches that have like dedicated children's specialists or children's librarian. We ask them kindly to come and do the story time since they have more solid training and more practice to do that. We do it ourselves very seldom at stops that take place like at a community center or the preschool, that they ask us to have a quick story time or presentation tying in with, like a lesson, that they're presenting.
but I think that's kind of gray enough that the board doesn't need to have
Yeah.
you have to have these story times, or you shouldn't have story time. So what about restroom facilities? I mean, is that
No restroom
falling out?
facilities, but I know where all the best bathrooms to go to along any of the routes. I will,
Does anybody ever ask when they come in?
not really, because it's obvious that there
Yeah, it's not a
isn't
camper.
one. Yeah.
From the outside, though.
I've only ever seen one bookmobile with a bathroom, and it was not very public.
We don't want to get in that business.
And it was not even in a rural area, so I was kind of salty. It was,
We have enough trouble with.
Yeah.
What's in the building.
everybody who saw that bookmobile was jealous.
So worth adding,
No.
I do not
No.
think we're.
self-evident, we'll call it.
The goal here is just things that people might expect. We want
People
to
aren't-
hide.
They're not gonna go to the policy to find the answer to that question, like, I need to know if I can get on the bookmobile and use the bathroom, okay.
And actually, answers to those 4 questions or requests is the gist of our reference services. We help them determine what's the best branch for them and try to connect them with
Yeah, I think that's covered,
reference at that
that's
branch.
covered here in the access to information about other services and programs.
Excuse
Okay,
me.
so I think here's the point that we all kind of agree we wanted to get across. All bookmobile stops are free and open to the public, even when located at private residences or institutions. And then Mary, your suggestion was the residences, we should change to organizations.
Residents sound like a single home,
House.
yeah.
Can we, that paragraph after the bookmobile is a fully functioning mobile branch, library branch?
Yeah, you
I
mean.
mean, if we want, oh, that's really important.
Should
Let's
we
have it
stop?
part of the introduction of what our service. Yeah.
Okay, what about, let's wordsmith it first and then move it up. I agree with that.
Well, when we said institutions, we sort of were trying to convey organizations.
How about residential, not private, but residential communities?
I like that.
Yeah, because you don't go to someone's house.
No.
Yeah.
So I think
And
you,
private makes it, that's the opposite message of what you're trying to send. Yeah, residential communities.
communities or private institutions.
Yeah. That's good.
Okay, and then Ann's suggestion is that all this goes up.
I would suggest only the first sentence, because we're just talking about services, and then now if you want more info about services, here's where you go.
So this could go just at the top.
Yeah, before that, yeah, right there.
There.
Yep.
It's a good intro.
How do we indicate for the board that this is
Make it blue.
been moved? But then is that gonna mess up the?
No brackets.
Underline. Yeah. There you go.
We've done green in the past.
Means it's moving. It's green.
Yeah.
All right, we'll talk through that. So then that leaves most current information about bookmobile libraries, mobile library service, including schedules and stop locations. Please visit jmrl.org.
That's good to have there.
Okay, here's where we get into some of the meat. Stops and scheduling, mobile library services operate through two primary service models. First is regularly scheduled stops at established locations, including community centers, senior living facilities, centrally located lots, and residential neighborhoods.
What's a centrally located lot?
I'm thinking of the one in Louisa, that's
Do we
like,
say parking lot? Do we say
I mean, sometimes they're parking lots, sometimes they're like,
vacant lots?
sometimes they're like outside in Nelson, they're outside the fire department. You know, it's kind of grassy. I guess it's
There's also
parking.
parking
Parking
lots,
would be
yeah.
okay. It's not, sometimes it's like the grass outside of the, not ideally, but. Parking,
Or spaces.
just saying centrally located spaces.
You don't have to have, parking lot or a grassy lot or whatever. It's just a space.
Areas.
I'm actually not sure about the centrally located, because some of our
If it were
stops.
centrally, it wouldn't be.
The reason why there's that stop is because they're so far from center.
Right.
They're centrally located for that.
That hub, okay.
community.
Oh,
Okay, Martha, what was the suggestion?
How we talk.
Spaces?
Spaces or areas.
Hubs, I heard the word hub.
Are they community spaces that are for libraries? I mean, they're not.
It's a parking spot. I mean, it's
Some of
not like a
them are
community center, it's like literally a,
Some of them are private.
You have to get permission.
We have to get permission, yeah, like the ski barn on 151. That's one of the stops and we had to secure permission from the owners.
Walmart
Walmart, yeah, we
and
can do it.
Zion, that was a chase.
Yeah, it was a whole. They were very accommodating, but you had to go through the corporate office. Overthinking that. So the what we're trying to convey is that they're kind of regular stops. There's the weekly schedule. There's the Monday through Friday, first week of the month, second week, third week, fourth week. And then there are also, number 2 here, special outreach events at community festivals, schools, other local gatherings. So people will ask Marion specifically, like, hey, can you bring, for instance, Marion is going to every single kickoff event for summer reading this year. And
Actually, all but one.
oh, that's true.
Scottsville said no. They'd rather have a fire truck.
We've got parking stuff.
You have a fire truck?
They'd rather have
So did we convey that there's one that kind of is on a schedule and then there's another one where you can request the bookmobile, which is, hard to do with that schedule, but it happens, especially during the summer. The road warriors are figure it out. And then we wanted to let the public know, the original document had a lot of detail here. So we kind of condensed it. Decisions about establishing or modifying regularly scheduled stops are based on the following criteria: the alignment with the current routes geographically, demonstrated community need or outreach value, physical feasibility, including safe and sufficient space, parking, ADA accessibility for the bookmobile, and the availability of staff and resources. I think that's pretty good.
Then you really do need to, I mean, that next paragraph doesn't really go. Because then you want to know why, how do I get,
We could flip these
Yeah.
how do I get a special?
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Because the last paragraph there is to request this,
Right, right.
so that should belong below the other 4.
And I would say the bookmobile does not operate, put that under availability, which is the next.
Yeah.
This one's gonna be wintergreen. One note here that Mike brought up, so to request a mobile library service to stop, individuals or organizations may submit a request through the form available at jmrl.org/bookmobile. Requests will be evaluated annually with final decisions made by the library director in consultation with the Bookmobile and Outreach Services manager. Currently, there is no form there, so that needs to be in place before the board votes this in, but it will include a lot of the procedural information that was on the previous version of this policy.
Right now, we're kind of rolled in with the outreach request form.
Yeah.
That goes out kind of like for schools requesting to visit a library or a classroom
And that's-
visit.
That's still how we would want them to request a one-off, the second thing here for special outreach events.
Yeah.
But we want to provide a mechanism for people that want to have a permanent every third Thursday
Yeah.
stop.
In this green sentence, requests will be evaluated annually. Should we just change that to periodically so that you have a little more flexibility?
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. We tend to try to align them with the beginning of the fiscal year.
Yeah. But you can,
But things will happen, like a stop will need to get something will close, it was the one a few years ago where it's like, we found out during the summer, they're not offering the preschool services that had been coming to the stop, and so we made an adjustment off schedule. Okay. The bookmobile does not operate when public schools are closed due to poor road conditions in the jurisdiction scheduled for service that day. It's kind of a mouthful. But both Marianne and I think are in alignment on this. We like that simplification of what to do with the bookmobile, as opposed to some of our branches where we have more flexibility because conditions vary and this and that. Like if the bus has to go out on the road, if the school buses aren't going on the road, then the bus is not. So Martha asked, well, what does this mean for days when the schools are closed for other reasons and we still go out on those days? Like in the summertime or for teacher work day or whatever it might be.
Yeah, any other school closure that doesn't have to do with weather, on summer or nice, like warmer weather is very rare that we close, due to weather.
And I think at that point, we would fall back on the emergency closings procedure where it would basically be a decision that we would make together. Right, if there's a tornado in the summertime or something, Marianne and I would consult and make an announcement.
But I would move that under service availability.
Mhm. That makes sense.
So does this provide enough clarity there?
I think so.
Because we could add something along the lines of like contact the bookmobile for. After the first line or
Or the person.
the very first line? Need a new paragraph?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, decisive. Open meal service is available in JMRL jurisdictions where funding is provided for this service. Not all 5 JMRL jurisdictions may have book meal services at all times.
I thought that was confusing. I mean, it sort of raises like, well, why not? Which don't?
It also sounds like it's not a possibility ever.
It
It makes it sound like there's never a time when we won't allow.
Why would they? Why don't they pay for bookmobile? I mean, I read that one. Oh, why?
I mean, until 3 years ago, only Charlottesville and Albemarle paid for bookmobile services. And it's been through,
It's just the wording of that particular sentence makes it sound like in no world will ever.
I mean, I'd almost
Well,
take out that sentence
How about-
totally.
well, I think we owe it to the patrons, and currently there's only one jurisdiction that's not getting bookmobile services. I anticipate that down the road they will. But they're not right now. So I think we owe it to our patrons who live there, if they go to look at bookmobile, to get an answer.
Well, it says where
This
funding
is
is
not-
provided.
I also think that's a little confusing because if you don't understand how our funding structure works, it could sound like the library is just not funding
Yeah.
services.
I'm totally open for whatever wordsmithing we need to do. I'm just advocating for the
Yeah.
inclusion of
Right.
something here that
Yeah.
addresses this.
How about bookmobile services available in JMRL jurisdictions? which have specifically provided funding for this service.
Or
Yeah,
which.
that, I mean, that's better.
Allocated is good.
Jurisdictions which have allocated funding.
I like
for this
specifically.
purpose. Yeah. And I don't think the second line is necessary at all.
Just take
What it-
everything else out.
Would it be too pointed to say something like where the county has specifically offered?
No, because it
Or-
could be the city of Charlottesville that could do it too.
Yeah.
Jurisdiction.
It's a jurisdiction.
Yeah. Charlottesville could decide next year they don't want bookmobile service anymore. We would plead passionately and I'm sure get it reversed, and I don't ever see them doing that, but you know, they could.
Yeah.
Per the terms of the original agreement.
Now we know all those coulds.
Yeah, exactly. Does this, yes, bookmobile services available in JMRL jurisdictions which have specifically allocated funding for this.
Period.
Does that meet your?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That's much better.
I like it. JMRL may offer additional outreach vehicles beyond the bookmobile, such as the Nelson Memorial Library Outreach Vehicle, based on community needs and funding and available resources. So this only exists because of the van that's outside here. Although down the road, you know, we wanted to leave it flexible.
If you want all the ands, which I think you need, because it's a combination of community needs
Could be,
and funding and available I would say community needs, funding, but you need all three.
we
What
could,
about community needs jurisdictional funding?
so I would suggest maybe we put the such as the Nelson Memorial Library Outreach Vehicle in
In
parentheses,
yeah.
and then do the Oxford commas.
And it's based on a request, specific request, right?
Yeah, that one was a bequest. It was a gift that came in during the renovations.
Bequest, not bequest.
That's
Somebody
not,
gave funding.
so it's not even really jurisdictional
That's
funding.
that's true.
No, that one was funded by donations and by fundraising.
So that's why it just says funding, not
Right.
jurisdictional funding.
Oh, right, good point, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
You
so
could
my
get a gift
suggestion,
designated just for that.
is to put a little red parentheses here. And a little red parentheses. Here. Teeny tiny strike through of these commas, which I know I'm not gonna see when it's time to get this posted. And put some little red commas. Based on community needs, comma. Right through. Funding. Oxford, comma. And available resources. Now it reads, JMRL may offer additional outreach services beyond the bookmobile, such as the Nelson Memorial Library Outreach Vehicle, based on community needs, funding, and available resources. This is a bit of a reiteration of something above, but for current schedules, contact information, stop locations, and service hours, visit jmrl.org/.
Tiny tweak in your footer. This is presumably going to be adopted in 5/25. Things go according to the usual.
Yeah, those are usually, I don't consider those to be part of the board vote. I consider that to be just like a, you know, sometimes what the board sees there might have a different day, just to, you know, I don't feel the need to go back to the board and say, can we get a new vote because I had the wrong date at the bottom?
Right, no. Good.
Okay, I like it.
It's much better than what was there.
I like it. Marion? You happy? Good.
I'm not unhappy, so let's say that. That's saying a lot.
Okay,
So that on the staff side, you have a form that ideally would get
yeah,
posted in the next month.
yeah, we'll get something up.
And possibly some website action.
I have this tendency of trying to be like so super specific, but then that would kind of like back us into a corner.
Right.
Well, this is meant to be the board's
Yeah,
that, so when the form, we can get a little bit more.
I think this covers what I would like the public to get, from like the official policy document without getting too bogged down in, I don't know, like tiny little details that might just be superfluous.
Okay,
All right.
we'll leave that up for the full board to review.
Okay, so last month, then moving to the next agenda item, we had started with looking at policy 2.44 employment references. And we had some questions about what was the purpose of this, what's sort of the legal background and framework, what flexibility do we want staff and managers to have, and are there any ways in which we would like to constrain staff and managers? And so David did a little research.
Yeah, I talked to the city, and dug up what their current city personnel manual says, and, JMRL adopts elements of the city's personnel manual that aren't specifically called out in our administrative services agreement with the city of Charlottesville, or in JMRL's policy or handbook or whatnot. And you can see that the language is very similar, so that leads me to believe that this original JMRL policy, city policy 20 years ago, they do recommend having something here, either a policy or something in the JMRL handbook that says, here's what you should do about employment references. Theirs is a little broader than JMRL's is. Like the one that we have basically says only I am authorized to give employment references. And that's not always beneficial for our employees, because I don't necessarily know what the day-to-day, if somebody is out with Marion 25 hours a week working, I'm not seeing that and can't speak to it. So I'm happy to say they started at this time. This was their position, the name, rank, serial number type stuff, which is called, they say in this policy, that's all that we're supposed to give. So I remember when this got tweaked to say we can have staff sign a waiver allowing for employment references. I think the only other tweak that I would like to see is adding some language that says the library director or designee, so that if Camille has an employee that wants to have a reference, they sign a waiver saying, I promise to hold harmless JMRL, then I can designate the manager to serve as that reference.
So that,
And that's reflected in the cities.
yeah. So you talked to just the HR director?
Yeah, I just talked to HR, well, not the director, but HR.
HR at the civic, and not a civic lawyer.
No.
Okay. So from what I've heard, though, I think I've only heard we need to have this in writing somewhere.
Yes.
Does it need to be a policy? What are the pros and cons of that being in a policy level or a procedural level?
Yeah, that's a question for the board members to weigh in on. I think this could be part of our handbook.
Starting with the committee.
It doesn't affect the public at all.
It's internal.
It's totally internal.
Yeah, my only, I agree, it's only internal. My only rationale for having it as a policy, if there was some legal reason why our council told us, hey, this needs to be at a policy level, and because the difference is you can change your own
Right.
procedures.
I think their concern would be that organizationally, if the board didn't tell me you have to have some procedures in place for this, then you had a manager give somebody a recommendation that they didn't like, they didn't get a job and they sued, that the board wouldn't be able to say, well, we told you to have a policy.
Right.
So I think it could be as simple as the board directs the library director to have a policy. And as long as we're doing that, then I don't think it's hurting anybody, except in the sense, to Anne's point, that it doesn't impact the public. I'm happy to move it to the,
I think I'm happy. I mean, I'm just thinking in my mind, there might be 20 other things that we want to make sure you cover. So does that turn into a laundry list somewhere where this is just, hey, have a reference policy, have a whatever else policy, have a procedure, I should say.
I mean,
I
is
don't
there
know
a
what the-
policy that says the director shall oversee the institution of a handbook, policy, employee handbook or something?
I don't think there's a policy. I don't think there's a policy stating that we have to have a handbook. That's a project we took on in 2019, I think. We did it because there was some lack of clarity for our staff
Yeah.
about where the lines are for Charlottesville employees and JMRL employees.
I mean, I personally don't see any reason that why this would be
You can
in
look at the handbook.
JMRL policy.
I think we do have it in the handbook too.
Yeah, I think it's probably duplicated in the handbook.
Probably the handbook summarizes this policy and references back to it, would be the usual mode.
Two before leaving.
Any employee who may want staff at JMRL to serve as a reference for them must have a copy on file. All requests will start with the library director, who may designate another staff member.
That's so much.
Supervisory contract.
We're consistent with ourselves.
Probably start with the library director.
Get rid of the policy.
To the policy, or what was that linked to?
This links to a form that links to
The policy probably, yeah.
policy, yeah.
But we could get rid of the policy. Just add the part that says, where was hold harmless? Yeah. You just add that to the procedure part.
Yeah, I think if you did this, if we took it out, if we deprecated the policy, I might suggest a very similar, more detailed document, but it's procedure 2.44 instead of policy 2.44.
Yeah. And staff will be held harmless for releasing additional information.
But I'm just saying this paragraph,
Generally, right, we don't have procedures without, I mean, I know some exist because Sierra was working on a project about this, but the procedures are mirroring a policy.
and in this case, it would just, there would be no mirror, there's nothing on the other side of the mirror, but it would still exist as a procedure.
I mean, why can't it just be here?
Well, just because it's irrelevant to the,
And this is the employee.
oh, why can't it only be here? It could, I feel like because you're invoking legal rationales and so forth, I feel like you want.
I think
something that's
if
a little
that's
more
the case,
detailed.
then my preference would be to have the policy. Yeah.
I don't have a
I
strong.
understand I don't get this at all. Why
This is all like CYA and stuff about, if somebody is unhappy about a reference that came
Mhm.
later, like, do they have a legal grounds to sue the organization? Which, and when I find these things that I think, why do we have this? It's probably because at some point in the past,
Someone
this
sued
issue
us.
came up, right? Or there was some discussion about it and the board decided, or the board was given advice, either by the city or by legal counsel,
Yeah.
that they needed to have it.
Okay.
I feel like if it's covered in the employee handbook, which all of our employees sign off on, then that's probably. I can bring this back to legal counsel if it's concerned. I think it's also one of those, if it doesn't hurt to have it as a policy unless one of our goals.
We just need to make it consistent with what that says.
Right, exactly. Unless one of our goals is to remove things that are not public facing from the policy, which this committee has discussed in the past.
Can we consult with our legal advice about that and just
Yeah.
let it be?
You will charge us $1,000.
Oh, well, no.
I'm happy to do that. I mean, that's certainly the board has him on retainer for just these types of questions. So if there's a concern. That in fact came up at the last meeting, but I thought talking to the HR department would cover it. The other thing we can do is talk to our insurers. They do HR policy consultation, and that would be part of our coverage. So if there's still a question about do we need this or not, I can take it back. If we're gonna have this policy, then I agree with Krista. The only thing we need to do is add some language saying,
You're designated.
the library director can designate somebody.
I mean, just from practical, then keep the policy. I just don't think it's worth,
All of the energy.
talking to an attorney who's gonna, just,
Says an attorney. If the
My-
attorney says we don't need to talk to an attorney,
Right.
here's the money.
Yeah, but they'll take, they'll charge you $1,000 to say.
My impression, it's not about, but my impression, is an attorney would say, yes, you should have it just because, like, why not? You know?
Well, he might say the same thing that, well, I mean, it is a specific person, but anyways, the last time I talked to our council, it was a he, as an identified individual. But, the question is still, would it need, I think this person would say we need it in writing. But again, the question is, does it need to be at a policy level or a procedure level or a paragraph in the handbook?
Okay, do you want me to determine that? I can take that back and, or do we just want to add the word designate?
I suggest we just add designee and then let it be.
I mean, Mike, my only thing is that I know we did have a project for a long time about trying to remove
Well,
the,
not that, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
the,
I just sort of from a mindset would like the policy manual to be as useful as possible to the relevant stakeholders. And it's not obviously that internal staff, it's the audience of the policy manual itself. Other than we, at an organizational level, we need staff to do X, Y, and Z.
well, since we're out of time, why don't I'll take this to our insurance company first and see if they have a quick answer. So like, oh, no, you have to, every organization needs to have this. And we can.
Well, yeah, or you can start with the insurer also.
Yeah, that's what I intended, yeah.
But in the meantime, why don't you put designee?
Yeah, we can do
Add the designee to the other one, so
That's a
then.
draft, yeah. Yeah, wherever
We
it's,
make a double decision today, which would be if we have to have it, this is our suggestion. If we
should
don't,
reflect
yeah.
procedure.
Mhm.
I think it's the first instance of library director right there, or designee.
I just think it's such a mess. I think it's the last one.
Because the last one is
If-
about more than
yeah.
just the basic
Right.
information.
Because we do sometimes get verification of employment requests, which
agreed.
if somebody's applying for a
You
loan or
don't want to
something.
designate that part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
I just wouldn't do that. My
Okay.
offices would do that.
Yeah.
And this is not on the agenda for the board to read as a first reading.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like we finalized our approach anyways. Is it or is it not an open question to whether this is going to live in policy?
I think so.
Yeah,
Sounds
so,
like we didn't have it.
right, so if it doesn't live in policy, our recommendation will end up being that we deprecate, so we're not ready for reading. Until we know whether we're recommending to deprecate or keep it in policy with these amendments.
There's mud.
Okay, we have 2 or 3 minutes just to pop open future items.
So the next focus, I think, for the committee is going to be, 4.61 Monticello Avenue. It is up for a 10-year review this year. It is good timing. The full board is going to be at the Central Library next month in May, which is a week early because of the Memorial Day holiday. So we're planning a continuing ed from Fred Hilton, the manager of that department. And Fred will also be available for a tour of that space afterwards. So the policy committee is going to need to, after kind of getting that, similar to the what we did with Marianne came, talked about bookmobile for the board and the CE, and then the policy committee reviewed it. Similar to that, the policy committee will start working on this hopefully at the next meeting, which is in June. And there's a lot to talk about here specifically. Anything, you want to talk about it or just That was enough of an intro.
It would be helpful, I think, before we have that continuing ed for everybody to see that.
See what's in what's in the current policy.
Yeah,
So
because
just
it
the-
has changed substantially.
The service has, yes, the policy has not changed. So the policy and the service are out of sync right now.
Yeah.
So your suggestion would be like when I'm sending the handouts and information to include this policy just for the board to review where we
Do you
are.
not,
I'm
or
not-
do you not think the
I think
board
it's-
should see it?
If I'm reading a handout about something that doesn't even exist right now, it's just gonna confuse, I think
Okay.
it would be likely to have more confusion
Well,
than.
I would like to see it before the continuing, ed, just to see what the content.
I'll send it around for the policy committee
Yeah.
after this meeting, yeah. And it's available on the website right now, but I'll send you a direct link. And I will mention, not to get into it, but this specifically talks about one aspect of the Monticello Avenue service, which is a free website hosting service for nonprofit agencies. So this does not get into the use of the physical space at the central library. So this committee and the full board will have to talk about, well, what do we want to offer here? And then also, what do we want to make publicly available as policy?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll send that around after this meeting.
But at the continuing ed, he'll talk about all the different things that are offered.
Yes, yes, there will be a lot to talk about and then to go show and tell.
Okay, so again, this is April,
Yeah,
that's in May,
June will be the policy committee meeting.
but May, we're meeting at Central. Is that
Correct.
Okay, great.
Correct, May and Central,
Early.
week early, and then June we'll be back at Northside.
We have to remember for a month, everything we said. Okay, anything else for this policy committee meeting? All right, we will adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you all.